Good morning and welcome to the Retired Living Truth series, and today's topic, the truth about going from we to me. And let me just jump over slides. So again, welcome everybody. My name's Brett Janelle and I'm your host today along with my partner here, Annette Janelle. So welcome.
Hi everybody.
And what we wanted to talk about today is somewhat of a more challenging topic, and it's about what does it really mean about going from we to me. And I say it's challenging because it's a topic that most people probably don't really want to talk about, and that's an inevitable time when we lose our spouse. So the whole topic of we to me, we being a couple and me being on my own at some point in time. And Annette and I, we've got to see this a lot firsthand, as have our panelists. And owning a real estate business with a team who specialise in helping people who are downsizing, we see firsthand the whole range of challenges that a surviving spouse faces. And one thing we know for certain is that those who are well prepared as a couple in advance seem to do a lot better than those who didn't do any planning at all, who never had a conversation about it, who kind of buried their heads in the sand. So we think it's a really important topic for couples, able to be able to have a conversation. And we certainly know that losing a spouse can be very difficult, and that's probably why we don't really want to talk about it, but it is something that's inevitable. So our intention for today's topic is really threefold. Firstly, we hope that by tackling this topic, it might make it easier for you as a couple to start a conversation if you are a part of a couple at the moment. And then secondly, our hope is that you'll leave the webinar today with some concrete things that you can do, actions that you can take to prepare for what will be inevitable in terms of losing a partner. And then lastly, if you have recently become a surviving spouse or find yourself in that position at some future time, we want to provide some resources that may make that somewhat, not easier, it's never easy, but maybe less challenging if you find yourself in that position. So I'm dealing with some technology here. So two truths. The first truth that I have up on the screen that everybody can see is that it is an inevitable fact of life that at some point we find ourselves without a spouse, and there's just no way around that. And then the second one,
unless you never got married.
Unless you never got married, yes, that's true. So this also applies to being in a relationship with a partner. You don't necessarily have to be married. And then the second one is that for most of us, we do fail to adequately plan for that day when we are going to be without our spouse. So I have two panelists with us who are going to help us kind of go through some of the topics, and I'd like to start off by just introducing them to you. And our first panelist with us today is Richard Schultz. Rich is an elder law attorney. You might have seen him at our seminars. Rich, would you like to just go ahead and introduce yourself and why we have you on the call today?
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is, part of the reason I'm here, I think, is that I deal with this issue regularly, both from a spouse point of view and a partner point of view, as well as a family member point of view when someone loses somebody that they love. And so often people have not, they think they've organized themselves and think they've prepared themselves. When the event happens, we find a lot of crises that need to be dealt with that can be easily avoided with a little bit of planning.
Thanks, Rich. And Juliana, as a financial advisor, could you go ahead and introduce yourself and why we have you on the call today?
Yes. So good morning. I'm Juliana Hart with Allstate Financial Services. And like Rich, I deal with this regularly. We have elderly couples that come in, and oftentimes, the wife, most of the time, usually has no idea what's going on with their finances. When their spouse passes away, they're really left in the lurch, not even knowing where their assets are, where the income's coming from. So it is a real problem. Not only are they in mourning, but they're also trying to put the pieces of their lives back together at the same time. And it is very challenging for people to navigate through that. And then oftentimes the children don't know either. Sometimes we have elderly parents or a couple where maybe the wife is not as mentally there she used to be, and now the children have no idea where anything is. So it is really a serious problem that really needs to be handled when you're doing your planning.
Thank you, Juliana. So welcome both Rich and Juliana. And so just a little bit of housekeeping for those who are new to the Retired Living True series and our webinars while we aren't able to do this in person. The way this will work is we're going to have a discussion for about the next hour or so around this topic, and then at approximately 11 o'clock we'll open it up for the audience as questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. If you have questions as we go along, on your Zoom screen you'll see that there's a Q&A icon. You can click on that and type your questions in as we go along, so feel free to type in your questions. And then when we get to 11 o'clock we'll open it up whereby you can still type in questions, or we'll have it so you can raise your hand and then direct your question to one of the panelists. And we've put together a handout. It was too hard to try to get it to everyone in advance, so we're going to make it available tomorrow. You'll get an email tomorrow morning, and that'll have a link where you can go download the handout that has a lot of the things that we're going to talk about and some great resources on it. So don't feel like you have to write down everything. We will provide that. And let's just jump in and just start talking about the two parts. So the way we're going to do this, we want to talk about being a we, what can we do to be well prepared for that inevitable day, and then we'll transition to being a me, what resources are available. So let's start off with the we and preparing.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, because actually being part of the Retired Living True series, we always talk about planning while you're healthy and you're feeling good about things, so planning for the future. So why is it so important as a we that we start planning while you're healthy? Rich,
I think from my perspective, people tend to assume things will stay the same. And so when a loved one gets sick, when there's a need for decision-making, financial decision-making, no one's ready for that. But with a little bit of planning beforehand, you can avoid the emergencies. I mean, one of the common ones that we're dealing with now actually is a couple had the vast majority of their bills paid automatically on a credit card. The card holder died, and immediately everything went past due. Services started getting turned off. Things started going bad. And so, again, very easy to avoid by having a card that has both names on it. I think the other side of that is that when you lose someone you care about, lose someone you love, your brain doesn't work right. We all like to think we're rational, sane people. But if you look at the advertisers, right, they know that our buying decisions are made emotionally. The part of our brain that makes decisions is emotional, not rational. And very frequently our rational brain is there to support things that our emotional brain made up. But when you lose someone you love, the emotional brain goes haywire, and you can start making very, very poor decisions. This is a little bit morbid, so I apologize, but one of my favorite ones, I guess, is, people who want to be cremated, and it's like, okay, I want this to be affordable. I want it to be easy. They go to the mortuary to dispose of the remains, and they're told by the mortuary, what box do you want to use? And, if you're like most of us, it's like, doesn't much matter because it's turning into ash. And they start out at $1,800 and go up. Now, if you haven't thought about it, you could imagine your kids, your spouse wanting to honor you and just not wanting to make the decision. And instead of going for the cardboard box that's included with a pre-package, going for the more expensive box and wasting thousands of dollars. So funeral decisions are a huge one. I think another one that I find very important are to have your financial documents in place. You need to make sure the accounts have both names on them, the beneficiary designations are correct. You want to make sure you've got powers of attorney in place with successors. Often very easy to leave things to my spouse, but if my spouse is sick, he or she isn't going to be able to make decisions for me. And I better have somebody backing them up. And a lot of couples really don't think about that. Or the last time they thought about it was 10 or 15 years ago. And it's the child they don't like anymore is, married to the so-and-so and the such and such, and things aren't going well. I think the other thing that I've seen happen just recently is older estate plans that have tax planning provisions in them that impose burdens and hardships on a surviving spouse that the circumstances of the tax realities don't support and don't justify anymore. And so we can simplify and make things much easier for the survivor by simplifying the estate plan. Those are sort of the big ones that I see. Juliana, do you have any ones that you see?
Actually, before we move to Juliana, Rich, can you explain how often should your estate plan be looked at for you to plan ahead? So,
You know, I'm a big fan of at least every 3 to 5 years reviewing it. I think if you know one of you is diagnosed with a terminal illness and you have time to actually think, it's not we've got 2 weeks before dad passes. That might be enough time. But to at least make a call to the lawyer that's done the estate planning, make a call to your financial advisor, and just check to make sure things are in order, that things work. Another big mistake that I see quite frequently is people owning a trust, but the beneficiary designation and ownership being wrong. So the trust doesn't work. And then there's the you ask about reviewing, and that, it's not uncommon for someone to have a second or a third marriage, maybe even more, where one spouse has their spouse from 3 or 4 marriages ago as a beneficiary on an account they just haven't looked at. And so, 3 to 5 years is kind of a minimum, but people wait much longer and create much bigger problems.
So just on that, Rich, we've done topics before specifically on trusts and wills, and I'm sure plenty of a lot of people on today's call have been to those, and we'll certainly do them again, hopefully next year, a similar topic. But I guess my question is, as a couple, do you sometimes find that one takes kind of responsibility for reviewing it and perhaps the other partner doesn't really recall what was in the trust from 20 years ago, and I've now reviewed it again, but I've forgotten all about it, and maybe things have changed?
Very frequently. And it's not even 20 years ago. Sometimes it's a year ago or 2 years ago, where one spouse is the instigator, so to speak, the one that pushes everything forward. And then the other spouse sort of is along for the ride. Whether it's the husband or the wife, it is almost irrelevant. It's about 50-50. But a lot of time, the spouse that was along for the ride is going to be the survivor. And he or she may get stuck with something that surprises them if they haven't looked and haven't asked questions. So yeah, that's a huge one. I think the other one that I see quite a bit is the practicing of the sharing of information, right? Where one spouse is in charge of, say, the household, and the other one takes care of the outside of the house, use a simple example. The spouse that cleans the house may not know who does the lawn work. That's relatively trivial. But there can be huge ones where you find out where a spouse, doesn't know where the bank accounts are, doesn't know the passwords, doesn't even know what bills are owed or how they're paid. And those can be a huge issue. I've had one which was kind of funny. Had a couple that was ready to go on a trip, and they put their RV in the driveway. And then the husband got sick and ended up dying about 3 weeks later. And it was at that point the wife realized she had no idea where the keys were for the RV, and couldn't find them. And we had to get it rekeyed. She'd never driven it. She'd never really cared about it. She liked being with friends. But I think that the really big issue is starting to share information, make sure they're both involved. Computers are another one, where one spouse does everything on the computer and the other spouse, watches the news. Well, that's happening. So much of your life is online. So much gets trapped in that, the cloud. So, what we call the cloud, that if you both don't know how to get in there and access the accounts, it can be a major disaster.
I had a lady that I was talking to, and she was caring for her husband, but he was still involved in the finance part. And once he passed away, she realized she didn't have the passcodes to get into all their financial information, even to get access to the computer.
Oh yeah, no, the number of times where I've had that, the number of times I've sat with people and said, okay, have you shared your passwords? Do you know everything? And one spouse looks at the other and said, passwords? I had no idea that things were secure online. So it can be it can be a huge issue, much, and getting bigger, right? I mean, how often, traveling today, right? If you get out of the house, you can't use cash. You have to use credit cards. How much of your shopping nowadays is done online using a virtual shopping tool, right? Whether it's at Walmart or Amazon. And if you don't have those passwords, you could have recurring orders coming in that you don't need anymore. You could need to go to the store and not know how to do it. Yeah, no, those are just, things that it's so easy. I look at my kids, I have teenagers, they sort of take that for granted. And I'm still like, okay, wait, passwords, right? And you got to choose. I use 4 passwords because I have 4 hands and they rotate through. But God help me if I have to come up with a 5th one because I won't remember it.
Thanks for telling us your secret.
What were those 4 passwords again?
Yeah.
I can't remember them.
So Juliana, how about yourself? What are you seeing as far as preparing ahead of time while you're healthy, and what do we need to be doing?
Well, I do think I'm going to repeat a lot of what Rich says, where we see problems in that we do have one spouse that handles most of the finances, knows where the income is, knows where all the passwords are. I personally had a friend pass away, and his wife was a stay-home mom, and she handled all the banking, all the bill pay, and exactly that happened, that bills weren't being paid. He didn't know it was drafted. He didn't know it was pushed out. He didn't even know their bank account password. She gave him a debit card and said, here. So, I watched him struggle in mourning and trying to pay bills. And so people, you do need to make sure your beneficiaries are correct. I deal a lot with the elderly, and again, what happens is the husband has the plan. The wife has no clue even where the income's coming from. So he passes, she just lost a pension that she didn't know she was losing. Or, his Social Security is quite a bit larger than hers, and she doesn't know that she can transfer over to his, and so for the financial side, planning for where your income's coming from and what your budget is, it's really important, because oftentimes, maybe the other spouse just assumes that everything's together and everything's okay and being paid, and it's not. And I have to deal with my elderly father. This is another big problem. I had a stepmother, they both got very sick. They ended up splitting. So I had to take over my dad's entire financial plan. And luckily he was in an okay mental state at the time to make me power of attorney. But had that not happened, my stepmom, who was also mentally incapacitated, was in charge of everything. And so he didn't take a step forward and plan toward, if she passes, which one of us children are going to take over. I have 4 siblings, no one else has any interest. So you need to make sure that somebody knows where your plan is going, what your intentions are, and make sure you have a responsible party lined up for that. I think this is where advisors are really important. Having an attorney, having a financial advisor, at least they know what your intentions are. Here your beneficiary should be. They're looking out for your best interest. If you do get to a point where mentally you're not in a good space, whether it's in mourning or just getting older, those plans do fall apart if no one else knows what your intention is.
You bring up a really good point about where finances are coming from, because we have a couple that are purchasing a home, and we realize all the money is coming mainly from his pension.
Mm-hmm.
However, if he passes away, all the money is tied up in the house. So she would not be able to, she would basically be house poor. And in many cases, we talk to people about, have you thought about doing a reverse mortgage?
Yeah.
However, her income is so low that she may not qualify for a reverse mortgage if he were not alive. So with him being alive, they could do a reverse mortgage now, planning for the future, so that she's covered whether he's alive or has passed away.
Right. That's a big problem that I see. Or a spouse will assume that she's getting the full pension, and they actually at the time signed up for half of the pension. But that was never discussed. It wasn't reviewed. Like, Rich said, you really got to revisit this stuff every couple of years, because, our lives are dynamic. Everything's changing, from year to year, month to month sometimes. And so just knowing where all of your money is really important too, and what is tied up, what's liquid. Just such big holes that I see happen. And I want to touch on the burial plans as well. I've seen family members almost like ruin their relationships fighting over cremation versus burial. Something as simple as that. And, you know, not knowing what their parents' desires were. And so you can prepare for that. We have these booklets that we have that you can list where all your advisors are, all your passwords, where every bank account is. And it's something you can put in your safe. It can be private until something happens. You can pull that out. It says, this is what I prefer. I want to be cremated. I want to be buried here. You know, it's a simple booklet, and it does take time to do, but it's really important to lay that stuff out.
So that's like saving an argument between a surviving spouse and children who maybe had different views
Yep.
in terms of what mum or dad wanted
Yep.
versus a spouse. So, so that book would be a great thing, so people could reach out to for that.
Absolutely.
What are some of the other concrete actions? One you mentioned I'd like to highlight again is having that conversation with your spouse in terms of our income now versus if one of us was, you know, surviving spouse. What does it look like? Does it change? So I think that's a
Right.
conversation everyone on this call, every couple should have. Because
Mhm.
we've seen that many times, as you've said, it changes and people just didn't realize, and suddenly life's upside down. And then you'd also mentioned about, I'm just trying to come up with some concrete things people could do. So listing out all of our accounts that we have, where our money is, sounds like another great idea. This
Yep.
bank, this account number, so we know if something was to happen, where to find the money. And then
Yep.
you also both mentioned about utility bills, different bills, whether they're on auto pay or not. So to know what bills come in and how they're paid, where from, and are they automatic? Because I know we've had clients where that's just been a huge problem, not knowing if it's being paid or not. And as Rich said, some are on auto pay, some aren't, and we don't know what accounts they're coming from. So I think, yeah, itemizing those. What else did you guys mention that we should put down as an action?
Making sure beneficiaries are corrected and lined out where you want assets to go, having a will or an estate plan in place, but not only having it in place, but making sure everything's titled correctly. I see that on my side. They take the time to pay for an estate plan, but then they don't change the accounts. So now everything's going through probate anyway. It was they just don't take the time to do it. So making sure you do dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure the plan is in place. Follow
Excellent.
through with it. Mm-hmm.
And another good point you made when we were talking, Juliana, is if you've got a financial advisor, make sure as a couple you meet with them.
100%. So many times I see one spouse just have zero interest, doesn't even want to come to the meetings, and doesn't know what the big ultimate plan was, what their goals are together. She just I always say that, but it's usually the husband that's doing it, but sometimes it's the wife, but the other spouse just has absolutely no clue where their assets are.
And the problem we've seen with that is now, the surviving spouse isn't comfortable with the financial advisor because they've never spent any time with them.
Right.
And that financial advisor had all of the history and knowledge of what the intentions were, but the surviving spouse gets some new financial advisor who has no clue why anything was done, and now we've got an even bigger mess trying to work through.
That seems like a good reason to have a local financial advisor, somebody you can both sit down and speak with, because we've had couples where they're financial advisors across the country, and one of the spouses is the one that's the main contact for that financial advisor. They're not sitting around a table actually having a conversation.
Right. I also am helping a family where the parents are having to make some decisions about where they're living, and they're not 100% mentally there, and the daughter's coming in not having any clue and having to come in and sit with us because her parents won't tell her where everything is, but she's trying to help them, but she can't because she doesn't have the full picture. And so, whether it's a child or a trusted friend, it's good to have another party that you can rely on and talk to them about where your assets are. And if something were to happen to you, this is where you can go. This is who you can call.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then a couple of others I want to bring up that I just had noted down was medical bills. So is there anything we need to know about there, Rich? I know it varies in different states, but if your spouse passes and there's a lot of medical bills that accumulate during that last part of life, is the surviving spouse stuck with those? I know some states they are. What's the case here?
Not in Nevada, and that's a really good point. I mean, one of the things that you want to be aware of for each other, most couples are because they share health insurance programs, but to know what your health insurance company is and your supplement if you're on Medicare, if you have D, all of that. That was an item that I highly recommend couples share and know where the details are. But as a rule, a medical bill of a spouse, of a person, is their bill, not the survivor's bill. So if I go out and get, if I were married and I get out and I run up a $300,000 medical bill, that's my bill, and my spouse wouldn't be liable for that. If there's actually, there's a couple of different points here, generally speaking. Medical bills operate that way. So that would be, doctor's bills, pharmacy bills, emergency room bills, surgery bills, hospice, all of those generally belong to the person who incurred them. The other side of it is what I call care bills. And those may be in-home care, that may be assisted living care, those kind of things. Those frequently are shared. And the reason is when placement happens, the spouse signs off on it. So both spouses say, or the well spouse says, yes, this is my husband, this is my wife, they're going to go live at Morningstar. I guarantee the payment. Well, when you guarantee the payment, you're liable. A lot of times that happens without somebody being fully aware of what's happening. So that's something to at least be aware of if your spouse ends up in that condition. And then a thought I had, just that's distinct from like a rehab placement, right? So if somebody's placed in a life care center to recover from a stroke or a surgery or a hip break or something like that, or pneumonia, that's considered medical for the first 100 days or so. And that's usually covered by Medicare and your supplements. Lots of talking. Last point is, the health insurance companies aren't going to tell you this. The hospitals aren't going to tell you this, right? They're going to send you a bill and say, look, you owe us the $3,000, the $8,000 for your spouse, pay up. It's not their duty to know your rights, it's your duty. And it's their duty to collect as much money as possible from wherever they can get it. And it's, again, they don't care about your long-term financial health. They care about their profits. And so you've really got to, as you're interfacing with them, you need to be aware of that. Or talk to somebody who knows those rules.
Great advice. And I know we have some people on the call, given we're doing these as webinars now, not physically as we had been before. We have people maybe out of state. So should they be checking what is relevant to their state? Because it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I talked about was Nevada rules. California and Oregon, to a limited extent, have family liability. So if you're married to someone and they're living in your household and a dependent, you may be liable for the entire bill under state law. And so that's something, if you're in different states, you really want to be aware of. And if you see a chronic illness coming up, an emergency, sometimes we can't, but to try to separate the finances and ensure limited to no liability for those future.
It's not obvious. The reason I think of that is, if I'm terminally ill and I try everything and I'm racking up these bills, and then if Annette's stuck with the liability, that's the last thing I'd want. So I'd want to know from my state as to that might impact my decisions in terms of.
Absolutely. And that's why you want to know about what's covered by insurance, what's not. You have, especially if you're younger, some of your insurances only pay a portion of the bill. And some of them won't pay any of it, right? They'll pay 100% if you're at this facility. But if you have to go over here for treatment, it's, no coverage at all. And so knowing where you're going and what's covered can help tremendously. And I know some of the Medicare supplements are that way now. If you're in Renown or St. Mary's or Northern Nevada, you get full coverage. If not, you get 50% or something. So that is an extremely important point.
Okay, thanks, Rich. And then one of you touched on credit cards, and you'd made a point about responsibility there for those, I think. So what should we do with credit cards? Do I immediately call the credit card provider and let them know my spouse just passed away? Do I just keep using it even though they're not about? Is there anything we should know there? Yeah,
I would not call and cancel it right away. And I'd be a little cautious about informing any financial institution right away. Not that they're evil, but you just don't know what their rules are, and you don't know what the title on the account is. We had an account that was in community property, but missed 2 words or 3 words with rights of survivorship on the end of it. Spouse died, that account ended up in probate. Now, she immediately, if the husband died, the wife was entitled to half upon the filing of the petition, but the other half was locked up. So just a caution about financial companies. But on credit cards, you want to be really careful because you don't know what's being charged to them. And so every card has a primary account holder, even if 2 names are on it. And if the primary account holder dies, the card company will lock up the account and start rejecting bills. What I recommend doing is collect all of the credit cards and safeguard them. Actively watch, incurred. So that's, again, we talked a few minutes ago about getting online. So if you know the passwords, you can log on to the website and see what's happening. But you want to wait at least a month and just see if there's any recurring household type bills, your alarm system, the lawn person, the water bill, right? Any of those that are being charged to that person's card, and then roll it over to a new one. Or if you're ahead of the game, you can reach out to the company, the card company, and become the primary card holder. Because again, they don't care as long as the bill's getting paid. They don't care whose name is on the account. But because so much happens automatically that way, you may lose a bill. And actually, one is a lot of times pharmacy bills, recurring medical supplies, are billed to somebody's card. If that card stops, you may not get the medicine you need. And that can be a problem, obviously.
Just want to touch on that too. There are oftentimes bills that are paid quarterly. So waiting maybe more than 1 or 2 months, wait a 3rd month, or look back 3 months. Don't just look back in 1 month of bills, maybe look back 6 months. Because some people do pay car insurance semi-annually or quarterly or something like that. You could definitely miss something just by not going back far enough. Another thing I wanted to touch on was life insurance. I had a couple, they were second marriages, and the husband was quite a bit older. She knew he had a pretty significant life insurance policy. So, she had some pretty expensive hobbies, horsing and things like that. But she always had this assumption that she had this huge life insurance policy coming to her. He died of a heart attack. It was an accidental death policy. They never had the conversation. So that life insurance never paid out. She pretty much had to sell everything immediately because they had no liquidity whatsoever. That was where her liquidity was coming from. So even just double checking types of life insurance policies, how long it's going to last, not just the beneficiaries, but the type of policy it is really important, because I've seen that more than once happen where they expected it and it didn't pay out. And then they were stuck without liquidity. And then if you cancel credit cards, you don't have any cash to pay bills. You got to be careful of all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, wow. So I take a couple of good takeaways from there. Don't go notifying financial institutions, because you might be locking yourself out of your spouse's money because the account's not titled correctly, and suddenly you don't have access to funds, and now have no funds. And then the other one you just touched on, Julia, Anna, is really understanding that insurance, because I might be making plans after Annette's demise of what I can go do, only to find out that what I thought we had isn't what we had at all. So yeah, that could really put a spanner in the works of my grand plans. Just joking. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, that in furtherance of what Juliana was saying, that was an excellent point. Is a lot of times you'll hear one spouse say, "Don't worry, I have life insurance, we're taken care of." And the spouse being told that assumes it's a very, very large policy. And in reality, it's a $25,000 policy, or 50 or 10, right? And which is a lot of money. I don't mean to say it that way, but when you're expecting, $500,000, $1 million, it's a huge impact. It's dramatic.
And when you have second marriages too, and maybe children from previous marriages, really stressing getting an estate plan in place that is very defined, because I've seen more than one fight between ex-children, children from a previous marriage and the new wife, and what the intentions are. And if it's unclear at all, it just gets really messy. And then you have people fighting over money and ruining relationships. And so, if you are a second marriage with prior children, really important to make sure it's clear what the plan is.
That's a really good point, because we've come across that numerous times, and that is really hard when you're grieving and then you're dealing with the children coming at you because they had a different understanding and you're not quite sure what's in the plan. So
yeah, we have one now where the husband it was her house before they got married, and now that she is dying, he has to leave the house he has a year to leave the house, and the kids want to sell the house.
Wow.
So, so not only mourning the death of his spouse, but then losing his own home too.
Right.
yeah, so
Well, I think if I might, in furtherance of that, if that might have been a good plan 15 years ago, right? A lot of times I see stuff like that where the plan was done shortly after the marriage, and they both got married and they both own houses, and they move into one spouse's house and say, you know what, if you die, I'm just going to go back home. And then they sell that house, pay off the mortgage on the other spouse's house, or buy an RV or do something fun. And the estate plan still says you have 6 months to vacate. And depending on the nature of the prior marriage and the way the kids were engaged and all of that, it could get really ugly really, really fast.
So we do have one question. We will take questions at the end, but this one has to do with what we're talking about. Is the surviving spouse liable to pay a deceased spouse's individual credit card?
I'm going to give you a lawyer answer. It depends. Generally, no. But the risk is, if you're a signer, it may ding your credit report. So it depends what you want to do with your credit report. The other trick that you do is the answer is generally no. What I do frequently is send them a notice to creditors and make them file a formal claim. If it's a big card, right? If it's $500 or $600, we generally pay it. But a lot of times when a spouse dies, you're surprised and you discover a $30,000 or $40,000 credit card bill. And then you just make them jump through the hoops. You make them file a creditor's claim. You tell them the estate's insolvent, right? Because we don't have a probate estate. Hopefully, everything went to the spouse. There's no assets, and you chip that way down, or you just tell them to go pound sand. It depends in my world a lot on how big that bill is, right? If it's a $5,000 bill, we make them jump through hoops and negotiate it down to $1,000 or $500. If it's the $45,000, $35,000, $40,000 bill that, unfortunately happens more than it should, more than you would expect it to, I make them jump through hoops. I just tell them to go pound sand. It's like, look, you gave an 80-year-old $40,000 of credit. What did you expect? Basically.
Is there any difference there whether one's an additional card holder to the primary, or it's still the same, makes no difference?
I'm assuming by the way the question was asked, is that the survivor was not a primary card holder. If the survivor is the primary card holder, it's your bill.
Right.
And so that raises another really good point, going all the way back to the beginning, to make sure you're engaged with your finances. The typical scenario, so many of us have kids that end up at divorce, and you find out that the spouse that's being left behind, so to speak, not our child because they're angels, you find out that they've run up a $50,000 credit card. But, it also happens with seniors where one spouse, for whatever reason, we'd like to think it's gambling, but sometimes it's playing bridge, sometimes it's taking friends out to, go to dinner, or it's just buying crap. And I literally mean crap. They go thrift storing, they go to HQVC, Home Shopping Network, and accumulate massive debt that that the survivor, it's not visible to them. And so you want to share your bills. If one spouse gets sick, start actively looking so you can prepare yourself for that if we need to do something.
I'm guessing in some cases, though, it could be just out of necessity the credit card's being used. We're not as financially well off as my wife
Yeah.
thinks, and I'm just trying to, keep the thing going, and I'm putting it on credit, and Annette doesn't realize that, but it's going to be a big shock when I pass and she finds, our life's been funded on a credit card. Or
That would
Very
be,
frequently. The other one where we see it happening a lot is somebody's in assisted living and they put the assisted living bill on the credit card. And not many of us can afford $3,000 a month, much less 5 or 6,000. And so they just keep buying credit cards. They keep running it up. Who cares about a $50 annual fee if I have to pay for the care? I see that happen, and it does happen sometimes where people can't afford it, unfortunately. But again, the idea is you want to be aware of it. You need to be. I've had it happen. I'm sure this is one of the things we're talking about, where the couple thinks they're well off and doing fine, and then the quote breadwinner dies, and the survivor looks and discovers $100,000 of debt that was supporting lifestyle, right? Or a home equity line that was the safety net that's been drawn down to almost nothing left, because that's how they were financing their lifestyle. And you really, it's unfortunate, but that does happen. Obviously, if it's a home equity line, if you want to keep the house, you got to pay it. If it's a credit card, make sure you're not the primary caregiver, primary card holder, because then we can shift it to the credit card company and they make allowances for things like that.
I'm looking at the time and we haven't gotten to me yet. We're still on we, so.
Yeah, so let's jump and talk about me. But just before we do, I just wanted to give a couple of tips that we came across, having done a similar topic elsewhere before. One great piece of advice that came from our audience that time was to actually, as a couple, swap roles. So whatever the husband does, the wife now has to do, and vice versa. So you just get a better understanding of life as a couple. So if one of you is the cook, now the other person has to do the cook, because oftentimes we find, surviving spouse doesn't know how to cook, whether it's the guy or the girl. We see that in both cases. And then also part of swapping roles is, the finances, so you know what's going on. That helps a lot, we were told. Yard work, just knowing how the operations of the house work. If you're relying on your partner for how, the alarm system, the sprinklers, swapping roles. Then the other great tip we were given was creating an operations manual. Just documenting some of those things, like the sprinklers and how they work and where the shuttle valve is. When it comes to winterizing, things you need to know. As Rich said, where are the keys? Where's the key to the RV, key to the shed, those things, putting that in the manual. Circuit breaker panel, just all of the operations of the house, whoever's responsible for that, just trying to document it to help your spouse at a later time. So I thought they were great tips. Yeah. So jumping over to me, I guess the biggest thing initially when you lose a spouse is just grief. So what resources and suggestions we have, where should someone go during that really tough time? Who would like to start with that?
Well, I know that we're talking about like hospice. Even if your spouse did not use hospice at the end of life, they do have free resources, so you can go and use it as well. Just reach out to hospice and see what for their grief counseling. And any support network, churches, anywhere where your support, you can pull in support, is really important during this time, because the grief can be all-consuming.
So on the handout that we're going to send tomorrow, we have our sponsors, and one of those is Kindred Hospice, and I know they've helped many clients in the grief process, whether they were a client providing services or not. But yeah, definitely reaching out to hospice is a great place. They have chaplains as well, and they're just a great resource to either help you or point you in the right direction.
And sometimes getting the counseling before your spouse has passed away, if they're going through illness, so that you can get that support ahead of time, is very helpful.
And I guess on that too, then they help also. They'll tell you some of the resources you need, whether you should be talking to an attorney at this time, your financial advisor. They'll kind of remind you about burial, and they're really supportive in terms of the things you can do now before your partner passes, so that you're in a much better position once they do pass. So, yeah. Rich, Juliana, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I do think go to your trusted advisors, whether it's your financial advisor or your attorney. I help people navigate through the Social Security where the income source, if maybe they're not my client, but where are your income sources coming from, where you need to start looking at things, calls you need to start making when it comes to handling the financial side. People don't know. They don't know who to call to report the Medicare or the Social Security. And going to your trusted advisors, we are resources for you because we help people through it on a regular basis. So.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest point I make for people is just don't panic. There's a lot that may need to get done, but if you don't want to do anything too quickly. And there's I joke with people, like when I get a call from the kids, right? I have a checklist I send to them, and it starts with throw away the fresh fruit and vegetables, and ends with lock the door on your way out. Not because there's any magic to it, but that we try to avoid things that are uncomfortable. And thinking about the loss of a loved one is brutally uncomfortable, right? It's downright painful. And so we sometimes spend a lot of time trying to distract ourselves by staying busy, sometimes doing silly things. Hospice, I'm a huge fan of grief counseling. I think reaching out to them beforehand, and if you have a spouse who's terminal, you can ask for hospice counseling. Highly recommend it before someone dies, just so you can emotionally prepare yourself. They can tell you, what the things that you need to think about right away. But yeah, I think the first thing, and I told my dad, I told myself, I've told, every one of my clients and all of their kids, that when you lose a loved one, grieve. There are some things you need to do right away. Lock the door, throw away the fresh fruit and vegetables, because if you don't, you will not want to go back in that apartment or house. You're just not going to happen. You're going to have to, but you're not going to want to. But really, other than that, deal with what's happening. Take care of, the memorial. Take care of making sure that, their body, when they're done with it, goes where it should go. And then take some breaths. But really, you got to, as always, right, take care of yourself first. So you're there to make sure the other things are taken care of.
Quite a few people that I've spoken with who have spoken with their attorney, they say their attorney has told them to wait at least a year, which seems to be pretty good advice. Exactly what you're talking about, Rich, is just taking some time. There are things to do in the meantime, but not making big financial decisions for the next year as you work things out.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I told my dad's like the classic example. His wife died, and I said, no big decisions for a year. None. 9 months later, he's getting married. 4 months after that, he's getting divorced. It was a good thing all around. But you really I tell people, you just need to be really careful, because you want to just be over it. You want to be done. You want to be away from it. And you end up, the number of times I've talked to families where they come back afterwards and they said, mom and dad had this antique, knick-knack thing. I don't know what it is, make something up. I don't know what happened to it. I said, well, was it in the garage when you threw everything out? Because they just threw it away. But I know with spouses, sometimes the first reaction is, I want to move. I want to go back to California to be near my friends, or I want to go, live in that condo I've always admired. And while the urge is natural, it will be a bad decision. You will end up regretting that if you go too quickly. So yeah, I always, a year, wait at least 12 months. You can put on the calendar, right? No big decisions. And then, when you do make the big decisions, make sure you have other people you're talking to, helping you understand the impact of the decision. Because it's very easy. It's very rare that if you do something slowly, you're not going to have time to do it. It's very common if you do something in a hurry that it ends up being a wrong choice, or you end up skipping something you should have thought about. So yeah, absolutely take your time before you do anything.
So thanks, Rich. So grieving is a very important part, and we've talked a lot about the mechanics and the logistics and so forth, which obviously is important, but as you said, it's kind of like secondary maybe to the grieving part. What about the social part? Any thoughts, tips there for people? Because I know we've had clients, one that comes to mind, his wife did all the social and you knew all the friends and she passed and he didn't know how to get in contact with anybody. And then he became very isolated and it was challenging. So is socialization important after losing a spouse, and what can we do to make sure we're in as good a position as possible as we're grieving?
Well, I think I have a couple of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but two easy ones. That's why grief counseling, right? Even if you have very close, very kind, loving, intimate, perfect friends, best friends since grade school, unless they're marching the path with you as you're doing it, they won't understand. And they're not going to experience it the way you do. So that, the reason why group grief counseling is just the interaction with people who are like you. My daughter's getting ready to go to college, and why dorm rooms, right? Because you're around people who are like you. They know what you're going through, so you can share stories. It's the same with grief counseling. I think the other thing, and again, it's a natural thing, is to hurt and withdraw, right? If you think about it, right? You touch a stove, you get burned. I'm not going to that stove, right? You lose a spouse, that emotional pain, it's natural that it would extend out into the world and want to avoid being hurt there. But it's vital to find out and begin social interacting. I've been doing this 25 plus years, and the reason why the women live longer than the men after a spouse dies is the men tend to isolate. And when you isolate and you lose social connection, it's literally fatal. It will result in your death prematurely. Women are much better at reaching out to social, much better interacting with people. In my life, my new wife is the social driver, right? Left my own devices, I would work all day and then, read a book. She's the one that wants to go out and spend time with her family, and she wants to go to do other things. But it's important if you're left over that you actually actively seek out things that you're interested in. Now, sometimes those are things you might have forgotten you're interested in, right? When you're married, it's us. When it's me, it's like, hey, I can go out and, go to Hot August Nights again, right? I can go and listen to concerts that she didn't like. Maybe that pub tour she didn't like, I can finally do. Be willing to explore your interests that you didn't have before, but that you didn't explore as thoroughly while you were married, while there was still a we. Because there's an adventure there to rediscover yourself.
You bring up a good point. I have a gentleman that his wife passed away a year and a half ago, and at the anniversary of her death, he had such a really hard time, and it was him reaching out to a hunting group that he hadn't, he just exploring interest and meeting other people. He said that really helped pull him through, because otherwise he was sitting at home just miserable and mourning her.
There are a lot of groups available too. You just have to know where to look. Looking online, Active Reno, grab the little magazines around town. There are groups out there. You just have to know where to look. And it wouldn't hurt exploring what your interests are even before your spouse passes away. Re-engage yourself with, like, my neighbors next door. They have happy hour every Friday and Saturday at 4 o'clock. We called it the board meeting, and only the men go. But they have their little social thing that they do. The women stay at home, and that's okay, And if anything were to happen, they have, 7 men that they talk to twice a week and, catch up. So it doesn't hurt to explore that stuff ahead of time as well. Keep you active.
Absolutely. I was just looking at my phone because there's a group, meetup.com. I have learned, I like hiking. I like being outdoors. I unfortunately am too busy to go out and explore, but I have a meetup group, and they set up hikes. And so I go on their hikes. They set them up. I just go and I follow them. But that's a good place to look, to go out there and there's I don't know how many different categories of interest there are, but there's reading books, there's, flower gardening, there's home gardening, there's, I don't know, there's the hiking one that I'm part of. There's one for old cars in Carson City. those type of activities, it's super easy, great use of technology, and to make new friends and get out and actually be doing something with your life.
Meetup.com, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Very good.
Thanks, Rich. So when you touched on what was important, you said, throwing out the fruit and vegetables and then locking the door, but you also touched on paying bills. So any advice in terms of how do you be prepared to know, or when you're in that situation, make sure the bills are being paid? Where would you even start if your spouse took care of that?
There's, where do you start? The first place is online, email accounts. Most of the time, if a bill's on auto pay, you'll get an email receipt. Or there'll be emails that'll say your bill's due or something like that. That's the first place I would start. I know I had a friend of mine recently passed, and what I ended up having to do was go to the bank. And I sat with US Bank for 2 hours, almost 3 hours. And we went through the credit card statements because I couldn't tell what was being paid automatically, what wasn't, how much of it he was using PayPal to pay a lot of his bills, and which I never even knew you could do. But then I find the PayPal account. Well, I found out PayPal was doing that. Then I had to find out how to get into his PayPal account, et cetera, and then deal with that. Where I would start, where if your spouse is still alive, is asking, what bills are being paid? What are they being paid from? Like that. The bank's another great one, as Juliana said, is, keep the credit card statements and go back over, 2 or 3 months of credit card statements. And you can, if you don't have hard copies, you can go online and pull them down. A lot of the basic bills we know, right? Power, water, that kind of stuff. Some of the ones that we miss are homeowners association, especially if your house is paid off and they're not paid through the mortgage. You may have 2 or 3 of those. Some get paid once a year, some get paid once a quarter, some every month, to find out that kind of bill. The other one that you might want to reach out, again, if you're at the example that I had earlier, that I mentioned earlier, where the pharmacy bills are on auto pay, or the medical bills, is to reach out to the company that's providing you and saying, how are the bills being paid? Just want to confirm what credit card number you have on file or what account you have on file. And then the other one, mentioning on the account titles, most of the time on your statements, it's going to say on the first page how accounts are held. Increasingly, they'll tell you if there's a beneficiary. They may not tell you who the beneficiary is, but it'll tell you if there's one on file. So you can know to go check that out as well.
So just on that, Rich, so you mentioned email. So a lot of people, get the bills and so forth via email. So that brings up a really good point. I wouldn't know how to get into Annette's email account.
Right.
So I guess having a conversation about where is that password. I don't want to access it now, but if she's paying the bills, I probably need to know about it if she was to pass.
Yeah, it's very, the first place to look is to know that you have a computer login. A lot of computers automatically will log into the different email accounts that are different online accounts automatically. There's a variety of online resources. I used to use one called OnePass. I forgot the other one. There's 8 or 9 of them now that are very secure. They can store all of your passwords. A lot of times people write down their passwords and keep a notebook, which, kind of makes you wonder what the validity of passwords are. But if you're using a notebook, you have to make sure that it's up to date, right? Because a lot of accounts will make you change the password. And so you want to make sure that those are always, always, always kept up to date as you alter them. I think, but the biggest one is the computer login. I mean, the number of, bricked computers we have, because we can't get into, we know there's information there and everything we need is there. And we don't know what the password is, right? You try birthdays, you try dogs, you try favorite child, you try first girlfriend, last girlfriend, and then you get locked out forever. So if you do have a computer password, make sure other people know it. If you're keeping your passwords in a safe, please make sure somebody else knows how to get into the safe. right? Having shared information in a safe is a good idea, but not if people can't get into the safe.
That's a great point. I assume the same applies then even for a cell phone. A lot of people store everything in their, iPhone, Android phone, and that usually has a password. So knowing what your password is, and then the computer is a good point because I know Annette has a password on her computer, and then the email account. So
Yeah.
those are all great tips. And then you also said, yeah, like PayPal, just knowing how bills are being paid. So I guess that should be written down somewhere. This is where we pay our bills from, because maybe Annette doesn't even know about our bank account that's at a different institution because we moved something. Just having that all documented sounds like great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people do that all the time.
I think writing it down somewhere too is really important, and knowing somebody else knows it. What if Ryan and I were to pass together and somebody has to handle our affairs and take care of our children? It's really important for another third party to know where our stuff is. Even as you get older, your adult children need to know that, because if you're sharing that information with each other but nobody else, then they're trying to get in, figure out where your finances are, what bills are being paid. So it is important to have another trusted person in your life to share.
That's a great point, Juliana. Yeah, we forget about maybe we both pass at the same time in an accident, and
Yeah.
great point. So would we like to open it up to questions now?
Yes.
Just before we jump to questions and answers, just a reminder, you can type in the questions, that little Q&A box. You can go ahead and type in questions, and I see quite a few people have, so we'll work our way through those. You can also, if you're on a phone, I see we have a number of people just called in listening to the webinar. You can press *9 on your phone, and that will raise your hand and allow you to ask your question. We'll unmute you. And you can also go ahead, and you should see a button on your Zoom screen that says raise hand. That also indicates to us that you have a question, and we'll unmute you. So any of those ways is fine. And just while we're doing that, I just want to put up our upcoming seminars, webinars that are coming up. So I'm just going to put a poll up on everybody's screen. If you'd like to go and register for our upcoming seminars, well, actually, our first one is actually a virtual community tour, Promenade on the River. We did a great community tour just last week or the week before with Clearwater at Ranchera, an assisted memory care community. And that was super popular. So we're going to do another one on September the 24th, which is a Thursday, with one of our independent living partners, Promenade on the River. So if you'd like to be part of that tour, just indicate that and we'll get the information out to you. And then October the 8th, we're going to do a seminar on the truth about finding untapped resources. So there's lots of great resources in the community that many people aren't aware of. So we're going to have all of our partners, our sponsors, share with you various different resources, and we actually did a survey out to attendees who provided a whole range of resources I wasn't aware of either. So we're going to share all of those on October the 8th. And then on November the 17th, the truth about who should be on your team. Rich and Juliana have just touched on several people having an attorney, a financial advisor. So there's different people, maybe a hospice, having different people that you know that you can go to if you need something when circumstances change. So if you'd like to register, go ahead and do that. And I'll leave that up there for a couple of moments. You can also go to the website, retiredlivingtruthseries.com, and register there if you're not sure about your schedule at the moment, or just call the number on that website to register and we'll get that taken care of for you. So do we have any hands raised? No hands raised? Okay, so again, *9, or just click on the raise hand if you'd like us to unmute you and you can ask your question. And let's just work through the ones that have been typed in starting at the top. Rich or Juliana, Athena has asked, when do you tell your bank that the account holder has died? When is the appropriate time to notify the financial institutions of the passing of a spouse?
My suggestion is, as Juliana said as well, about 3 months in, just so you're sure what's there and what bills are being withdrawn from it. The automatic deposits are going in and out. That's a huge one sometimes. If it's not a joint account, if it's a joint account, you're usually going to be okay. But if you notify the institution that one of the account holders has died, you may immediately lose the automatic deposits and withdrawals that were associated to that account holder. So you want to know what those are first before you tell them. And that generally takes 3 months.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rich. And our next question from Karen is any problems if only one spouse is on the utilities, homeowners association, etc., different types of accounts? Or should we have both?
If you can, you should have both. A lot of times if the household doesn't change, you don't change an address, it won't matter. But technically, you're going to have to close that account and reopen it to put the survivor's name on the account at some point. So it's better to do that before, as soon as you can.
And Rich, are there any accounts, or Juliana, that we shouldn't have both spouses on? Is there any time that works to our disadvantage that you can think of?
I would say credit card accounts. It doesn't give us the opportunity to negotiate those down. Juliana, do you have any ideas?
No, really, that's it. As for anything that is joint that you want to maintain that's yours, it is better to have two spouses on aside from maybe a credit card.
Okay, great, thank you. And then again, to raise hands, there should be a little raise hand button. Actually, can we just test that that's working? Because it's surprising.
I did see somebody raise a hand, but then they put it down right away.
Oh, did they? Could everyone just try raising their hands just for my amusement that it is working?
Got one. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, great, excellent. You can put your hands down, or I'll lower them in a minute, or I'll click on lower hands. Thank you so much for that. So here is a recommendation. Stephen Ministries is a non-denominational resource in terms of dealing with loss, death, divorce, dementia, etc. Sounds like a support, counselling, grief type service. So Stephen Ministries. So thank you for the person who provided that. And then we have, let me read this. We've donated our bodies to the UNR Medical School. Hopefully that's after you pass away. We are delighted to be recycled and still of some use. We all appreciate that. We're also happy to learn our very advanced age was not a problem. So I guess that's a good point. Yeah, what options are available to us when we pass, and the University of Nevada, Reno, the medical school, sounds like they'd be happy to take some donations, yeah. I don't know how else to say it. And yeah, to help further medical science. So thank you for sharing that. And then next question, who all needs to be notified when a spouse passes? So Danny's asking, who's the list of people we need to notify? So starting from the top, what would be the number one organization place we need to notify?
Well, the first one is the kids. I say that only half flippantly. But that happens. Social Security will generally be notified right away through the mortuary. Pension companies are if they're getting a pension or some sort of retirement payment from a company or something, you want to notify them right away, because those payments, sometimes they change in amount, sometimes they don't. But if they do change in amount or end, that money will be taken out of your account. So if they make a $3,000 deposit, for 3 months, then you reach back and say, oh, sorry, my husband died 3 months ago. They're going to reach in and take $9,000 out of the account. And you do not want that to happen by surprise. So those groups you want to let know as soon as you can. And then life insurance companies, so you can get paid.
How about your attorney? Because with the trust, will.
Yeah, you want to let the attorney know. I was thinking in terms of institutions. I think you want to probably, one of the first people, okay, I'm a lawyer, so full disclosure, but or a financial advisor, that's probably the first place to reach out to, because they're going to know a lot just from what they do for a living of who to contact, who not to contact. And so you want to just be on top of that to the best of your ability. And again, remember I said quite a while ago, you have to assume your brain's not working right. Well, Julianne and I, no matter how much we like you and appreciate you as clients and appreciate you as people, we'll be able to step back a little bit and see a little bit more objectively what's happening or not happening. So that's a huge, I think the lawyer is probably one of the first people you should reach out to, or your financial advisor, if you've got one that both of you trust. As Juliana said, make sure you both know your financial advisor before you get there.
So, Rich, what would you suggest in the case of, obviously it's clear from what you're both saying, it's good to have an attorney or a financial advisor, but if for whatever reason I don't have either of those, where can I reach out for help? Someone who's just totally lost, they've lost their spouse, they're in grief. And in fact, before you answer that, what's the very first phone call do I make if my spouse has passed away? If I think maybe there's some chance of survival, I guess 911. But
Yeah.
other than 911, who should I be calling? If it's obvious that they've been dead for quite a while, who do I call?
If they're on hospice, you're going to want to reach out to the hospice doctor, nurse. That's the first place to reach out to, because they'll come in and help you move the body and deal with those right away horrible things that you got to deal with. I mean, it's very, very uncomfortable. I think one of the, again, pragmatically, if you're at home, it's 911 or someone to help you dispose of the body and deal with what you need to deal with there. That's why a family member, you want to have someone you've reached out to collectively who you can lean on. Whether we do it for clients all the time when the family's not nearby. It just, you want somebody who can come in and deal with the cleanup while you're grieving. That's a huge part of it. I think the other couple of other issues that come to mind, again, I was half flippantly family, but family for sure, one of the first groups to reach out to. I've just really had great luck with hospice in those moments. For my clients and for myself, I've often said hospice is God's work. And they really earn it at that moment. They really can help people.
Thank you, Rich. Let me jump over to Tom, who has a question. So I'm just unmuting you now, Tom, and you just need to accept that on your screen. And go ahead, Tom, and ask your question. Hopefully, Tom, on your screen, it just says accept. There we go. Oh, I think Tom's put his hand down. Okay, thank you. And so the next question we had here, again, *9 or press raise hand if you would like to be unmuted. We have, so Joe's asking, after the first year of being alone, do you have any thoughts on what one should or might do? So someone maybe after a year of losing their spouse who's feeling a bit lost, how to get engaged in life again. Any suggestions, thoughts there?
To groups, sorry about that. Reaching out to groups, where your interests lie, start reaching out to family members that maybe you could do things with, and, church groups, coffee groups. I would start, recollecting your life together and where you want to be, and then start taking some steps forward after that. But like Rich said, wait some time, figure out where your head's at, where your heart's at, and then start reaching out to where you want to be.
Yeah, making those big decisions, like if you wanted to move somewhere, waiting after a year before making that decision to move, unless it's something that you've thought about prior to your spouse's death, that you've already planned that ahead of time, or making big financial decisions.
Yeah.
And another one I'd like to put in there is education. Learning is a great way to meet people. So one of our great resources we have here is OLLI, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which is part of the University of Nevada, Reno. That's a great place to go along and learn different interests, look at the catalog of all the different topics, whether it's learning how to fish or arts or whatever it might be, doing something that piques your interest, and then just meeting people that way as well, just to have that social aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think OLLI is a huge, or organizations like that, to find out what you're interested in, what you like. It's easy, you lose somebody, and as you said, maybe I like fishing, maybe I like Greek history, what do I do? How do I replace a faucet? OLLI has classes on that. It's great advice.
Our next question, did I click on the wrong one? Oh, there we go. So Marcy would like to know, oh, okay, no, she was just making a comment. She thought it concluded. Next one, Oh, okay. Someone mentioning Ollie. So thank you. I honestly didn't see what you had typed until just now. So thank you for bringing up Ollie. And Ken mentioned a client obtained a reverse mortgage because of lack of income. I thought they were asset secured rather than income dependent. So can you explain that further?
Yeah, if you have a house that has a homeowners association, you still have to pay for your homeowners association, your taxes, the insurance. So you need to have the income to be able to pay for those items. And if your income is such that it doesn't cover that and all of your living, just basic living expenses, then they won't do a reverse mortgage. So it does, you you do need to have enough money to cover that.
To qualify
To
know,
qualify.
yeah. But once you have the reverse mortgage, then you can use that to pay those bills, but they won't give you the reverse mortgage unless you qualify without it, which is kind of
Right.
confusing, but yeah. So thank you, Annette. Leslie would like to know, how do you add someone to your will? So that's for you, Rich. How do we go
Hey,
about adding someone to our will?
if it's a last will and testament, you have to do it by something called a codicil, and that's basically an amendment to your will. And it says I want to put someone in there. Do not handwrite on your will. Um, Handwriting on your will to add somebody or typing in somebody's name or something, modifying the will after it's been signed in general will void the will, and you'll have nothing left. So you definitely want to do that formally, uh, properly executed, properly drafted, all of that.
I'm sure that probably surprises people. I would have thought naively that you could write in, sign it, date it, and you'd be good to go. But now you've got nothing.
No, you would end up with nothing or less than nothing. You'd create a problem. 99% of the time, that would be known as a lawyer's feeding frenzy. So if you do that, please let me know. Give your family my card, because that's a much happier, well, I don't know about happier, but much more profitable area of practice for me than doing an amendment to a will.
Thank you, Rich, for explaining that with those technical terms of feeding frenzy. I'm going to jump over to Ethnia, and I've just unmuted you. So yeah, go ahead and ask your question. So hopefully, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name, Ethnia.
I think so.
And yeah, you just need to accept that I've unmuted
Unmute.
you. There we go.
My husband wants to know, how do you make sure you have a simple cremation? I mean, when you die, what happens to your body after they take it to the mortuary? At what point do you then move to some kind of a funeral home yourself and go from there to find out how you have a simple cremation?
What I would suggest doing is prepaying for it and then arranging where you're going to have it done. Neptune Society is a good one, but any of the local mortuaries will let you do a prepaid plan. Okay. And then document what you want to have happen. As I said, and it's still really funny to me, right? I had a client friend prepay everything. We go to the mortuary. They will take you to the mortuary. And we're sitting there signing the paperwork, and they say, well, what box do you want? Well, I know my client, he wanted a cardboard box. And he would have taken, wrapped in paper, but that wasn't an option. And they're trying to sell me the $1,800 or the $2,500 or the $8,000 box. You don't need that. That's one. And then the other one is to be clear what you want done with the cremains after the fact. So what happens is they will, by default, put you in a little plastic box, wrapped in plastic, with a tag in there with your name in it. That's how we know it's you. And then wherever you want your cremains disposed of, down the disposal, across the Truckee River, a Catholic cemetery, wherever you want that to happen, again, have that set up, have it communicated effectively. The hardest part, and there's a lot of, the family will never be all on the same page. They will always, just emotionally, they can't be. But if you've left them instructions and say, I want to be, to to half tongue in cheek, I want to be burned in a box. I want my ashes dumped down the street corner, and then drink Budweiser because you're not spending any money on real beer for my funeral. Spell it out. If you want something more than that, spell it out. And then, of course, if you die relatively soon, it's not going to look the same way you think it's going to, because COVID limits the number of people in one spot. And a lot of churches simply aren't doing funerals the way they used to. They look different.
But thank you, Rich. I think you made some really good points there. One, have a conversation with your spouse. And second would be having a conversation with your children, so you've communicated to them so there's no ambiguity. They can ask questions, is that what you really mean? And then thirdly, having that in writing, so if there's any kind of misunderstanding, you've got something that you can pass to the children or whoever it might be. This is what mum or dad or my spouse wanted, so that you can honor their wishes. So.
And actually, it's interesting too. Karen mentions the Neptune Society. It says it's good for travelers. You can pay a little extra and be covered anywhere in the world. They'll take care of the cremation and send the ashes to a designated location.
You can always also make payments with the Neptune Society, Cremation Society. So you can pay for it up front over a period of time in a payment fashion. Funny story, I had some clients go through the Neptune Society and they ordered their urns online. It's like they found these coupon things, and his was a motorcycle and hers was a dolphin. They actually brought them in to show me what their urns are, but they had already prepaid for it, bought the urns. And you know what? It just took the guesswork right out of it for their children. This is the urn I want to be in. I've already paid for it, and if you want it definitive, prepay for it. It's already done.
Perfect. Thanks, Juliana. So our next question is, can one spouse pay for another's cremation plan in advance? Example, if spouse is in hospital and unable to make decisions. In hospice or hospital, I guess. Yeah, but in hospice, no, thank you. Unable to make decisions.
I think it's the same way through the Neptune Society, Cremation Society. Absolutely. You can pre-plan that.
Or if through any of our local mortuaries, I would think it'd be the same. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. From Alfred, if your family is such that you don't want them around when your spouse dies, any strategies that you could suggest?
The rude one is don't tell them. That's one. I think you want to be a couple of very, this hopefully will sound like a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but the first thing is to have an estate plan that excludes them from making decisions for you, right? In your will, your powers of attorney, your trust, if you have one, that say, I have these people, I don't want them around. The law by default gives, when I say family, I'm thinking of kids. But if there's no kids, even if it's siblings or parents, defers to them in terms of decision making, in terms of what authorities they have. And if you don't want them to have that, you have to spell it out very, very clearly. Again, what we've talked about, repeatedly just in the last few minutes, is the, prepaying your funeral, having it all laid out. I had a family member that had separated from their family. Their biological family was very religious and wanted certain rights and organizations involved and things to happen at their death. And my client at their death really wanted to be cremated and left under a tree somewhere. That's what they cared about. And it started to be a huge fight until we found the little envelope with the instructions in it. And then we had the instructions to rely on. So that can be a huge issue. But important, again, with planning, you can avoid it.
Thanks, Reg. I don't know if either of you can answer this next question. Who do you contact locally if you and your spouse wanted to be buried at Arlington Cemetery?
Locally, I would reach out to the VA near term. You want to make those arrangements if you're entitled to be buried in Arlington. You want to make those arrangements early. it's a relatively big deal. It's simple, but you do want to reach out to the VA. The VA website, va.gov, also has links to how to get insured at Arlington and the steps to take.
Thank you. And next question is, how long do you have to sell your house after the death of your spouse? Are there any limitations or anything people need to know about?
Only if you have a reverse mortgage. Well, no, because even a reverse mortgage, it wouldn't matter. No.
If there's a reverse mortgage, I mean, that might be the question, where you have 6 months typically after the death of the mortgagees. But after a spouse, unless there's something else going on, I don't think there's any requirement that the house be sold.
Community property.
If there's a reverse mortgage, it's only in one of them has a reverse mortgage. Maybe
Right.
they're married after that reverse mortgage happened, and then the one that has a reverse mortgage passes away, then yes, you have to sell the house within a year of the passing of the spouse. But they will start asking you pretty quickly after they're not passing, but just moving out. Just moving out of the house causes that to happen.
Right.
That would be a good situation if you've been remarried and your new spouse has a reverse mortgage and you're not on it. What are the plans if that person passes, or do you need to refinance that reverse mortgage to both be on it so you're not left homeless? That is a good point. But otherwise, I don't think there is any time limit. You can stay in the house as long as you're on the title and.
As long as you can afford the payment. So that's the other thing, is just knowing your income. And with the passing of a spouse, if your income changes because of that, then can you still afford to stay in the house? But there's nothing really preventing you from staying in the house if you can afford it.
So we have about 2-3 minutes left. If anyone has any final questions, I think we've covered all the ones that have been answered here. Just running through the list, yes. Anyone got any final questions? Anyone would like to be unmuted to ask Rich or Juliana a question? Well, if not, we would just like to thank Rich and Juliana so much for giving up your time today to help us better understand how to make that transition from we to me and how we can best plan. And we appreciate everyone being on the call. We had, I think it was close to nearly 100 people looking at couples and individuals on the call. So obviously it's a topic everyone wanted to know about. We will get a recording out of the call tomorrow, along with a link to the handout that covers a lot of the points that we talked about today. So as you plan and think about it and are having conversations, you've kind of got the bullet points that Rich and Juliana both talked about. And we also have there some resources to help during that process. It will include anything else I'm missing?
No, I think you've covered it.
Yeah. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing everyone on our next seminar webinar. I know some people have asked, when are we going to be back in person? We did send out a survey last week to attendees, and a lot of people said we want to be back in person. And so do we. So we're looking at January. We know we're not going to be doing it for October, November, just because of all the social distancing and being safe. But our plan is in January to be back in person. We have our 12-month program set for next year and all the dates in place. Our venue is happy to have us back in January based on where we're at the moment.
But it is a moving target. So our dates are set for next year. And once we have our topics, we will definitely get the calendar out to everybody. So it will be continue in this format until we are actually able to be in person.
And for those who are wondering, who don't feel safe going back in January or whatever time, what we're going to put in place is the ability to have these done as webinars while we're physically in the room. So you'll be watching, interacting just like this, except we'll be in the room with people who do feel comfortable at the appropriate time. So no one's going to miss out. We're going to still have it available in both formats. Yeah. So thank you again so much, Rich, Juliana, and all of the attendees. We can't wait to see everyone in person rather than staring at a computer screen. But we really appreciate everyone's time. We hope this was helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a fantastic, wonderful day from all of us. And
thank you. You have a
Thank you.
wonderful day.
Thanks, Brett and Annelle. Brett and Annette. Sorry. Take care. Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye. Can you end the share?